And thank you, everyone. Join us for Box Days Thessaloniki, yet another edition. This is not my first time in Greece. I know a few words, but I'm pretty sure that saying Kalimera this time of the hour is not a good thing. But it's my first time in Thessaloniki. I'm so happy to be here for real, because I was supposed to be here in 2020. Then stuff happened. So we're here. Great. So I have about 40 minutes to talk about a few things, and the topic of today is called setting up data-driven tests with Java tools. So I would assume this being a Java conference that most of you, if not all, are Java developers. That is correct? Yeah, most people raise their hand. Good. So for those that didn't raise their hand, what are you doing? Is it Go, Rust, Python, JavaScript, something else? Doesn't matter. What I'm going to showcase works for most stuff, even if it's not Java. Hold on a second. I need to do this for Dimitris. So, my name is Andres Almiray, and as David said, I'm coming from Mexico. I live in Switzerland. I like to talk about open source technologies and a lot of things about technology. So, this is the agenda for today. We're going to deal with what is the current state of testing, because I guess that most of you have to talk to a database in one way or another, whether you do it directly or indirectly. A few of these testing tools that we can make use of. Again, many of these may be used with or without Java. Then how we can run this with a particular database, do a live demo. Hopefully it won't crash and burn. And then I leave some resources for you. Does that sound okay for you? Yes, I'm excited in the room. Excellent. Okay, so what is the current state? Obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about Java, and which is the language that brings us together today. And if you are building applications for the web, so microservices or what have you, you will very likely going to use one of these frameworks. So let's see some hands. Who uses a Spring Boot? Yeah, about 70% of you, which is quite kind of expected. Who uses Quarkus? A few hands. By the way, there is a workshop. I don't know if it's happening right now at the same time with Holly and Dimitris about Quarkus. Yeah, exactly. So after this session, just go for the other one. And who uses Micronaut? No hands. Helidon. Jakarta EE, which is the new way to pronounce Java EE. Yes, a few hands. Perfect. So no matter which one you choose, it's very likely that you already know some of those APIs. And if you need to change to a different framework, say you started with Spring Boot, which is the most popular, and then move to the other ones, the names of the annotations and the base classes might be different, but the behavior is quite the same. So don't feel bad if you feel like, oh, I need to relearn everything. No, you actually can translate your knowledge. So that's a good thing. But you may have a few questions on when it comes the time to test applications, and they are bound to a database. Well, I can tell you about my experience. Back in the day, when we needed to talk to Microsoft SQL or MySQL or Postgres or Oracle, the things that we had to do in order to run our test cases were not really that nice. Who remembers talking to the IT person and saying, hey, can you provision such and such version of this database and make sure that it's available for me so that I can run it? And they will tell like 3 months later, we couldn't do it. Or they provisioned the wrong version. Or they told you, we don't have enough licenses for you to test, so find another way. Exactly. So that's when we turn into in-memory databases, H2, HSQLDB, and a few others. And that made us test things very, very fast, right? Except when we needed to talk to a specific extension that was written for that product that we were talking to. So if we were using PL/SQL, or we had to use an extension for Postgres, will HQ help us, or HQLDB help us? No, right? So kind of like a mixed bag. So we need the right set of tools to make this work. So I would assume that most of you use JUnit today. Is anyone still using JUnit 4? Okay, no hands. Great. So JUnit 5, perfect. And JUnit 5 is the latest version of this long-running library, as I believe that JUnit 5 is the most popular library downloaded from Maven Central. Yes, it's true. It's a testing library. So I hope that most of you are doing testing. We also have an extension called DbUnit. Who didn't know that DbUnit existed? Okay, a few hands. And DbUnit is great. It started from, I think, 2003 or 4, so it's from JUnit 3, 4, and later. But it has not been kept up with the time, so it doesn't integrate, let's say, natively with JUnit 5 and modern Java. Yes, you can use it, but it's still a bit wonky. For that reason, there is another project called Database Rider. This is an extension of DbUnit, which is still an extension of JUnit and Inception, so that you can have modern Java features when you want to do these kind of test cases. Okay, test containers. Who doesn't know what test container is? Wow, everybody knows, so almost a few hands. This is my crowd, perfect. So if you were to take something out of this session, use test containers. So the advantage of test containers is that you can run containerized software, any kind of software in just any container. And test containers will take care of the life cycle. What you want is something to start and to download a particular image, set it up, and once the container is ready, then you can continue to do the work, whichever it might be. And once the work is done, well, in this case, running test cases, whether it's successful or a failure, you want those resources, that ephemeral container, to be tear down and the memory reclaimed. So this is what test containers can do for you. Now, it has test on the name because it was originally thought out, oh, let's do this with testing. But you certainly can use test containers and its APIs and its libraries to do more than that. Test containers happens to be one of the tools that we can use with other languages. It has bindings for .NET, for Go, and I think, I'm not so sure, but I think it also has for Python. So if you need to branch out to other languages, test containers can also be used for these kind of deals. Now, I work for Oracle, and these are commercial products provided by Docker nowadays. So you have test containers, which is open source, but if you wanted to have access to other features, then Docker, previously it was called Atomic Jar, was acquired by Docker. They provide this thing called Test Containers Desktop and Test Container Cloud, which gives you other advantages. So I'm not here to sell all those things. You are free to make your own choices, just letting you know that these things exist. In case of database software, I can certainly do demos on Postgres, MySQL, or other database products, but I would like to showcase the Oracle database for a few reasons, not just because I'm an Oracle employee, but as a Java developer, I believe the feature that I'm going to showcase right now is a good one. It's not unique to Oracle. The possibility to run more than one data format within the same database engine is known as multimodal. MySQL has it, Mongo has it, Postgres has it, and Oracle has it. We call it the converged database. Now, I believe that Oracle is the one that gives you the largest amount of storage formats within the same database engine. Now, as a developer, what excites me about this is that I can use one query. I can use one query language, SQL, to do queries through relational JSON documents, graph, vector data, even if these data resides within the same relational table or multiple tables. It's just one language. If we wanted to do this with other vendors, what we'll have to do is go one level above into the application layer, deal with different drivers, and spend more time learning how to do these things with a different format. So this is why I like the Oracle database, because we can push that down one level, which is the database level. There are other things that the Oracle database offers, which are free. Some others are open source. So just so you know that you have access to these things. Now, you can run the autonomous database, which is the database on the cloud, and there is a free edition for it. Just go to oracle.com/cloud/free, sign up, and you get access to 2 instances of the product plus a few other resources, and these resources will be available to you for free forever. You also have access to an on-premise database. It's called the Oracle Database Free, starting since version 23 AI, released in May of this year. Last year, we released it first for developers. It's the first time that the company does something like this, that they are really taking care of us, developers. They really want us to test out and to run these things. Now, Oracle Database Free means that you can use it in development, in testing environments, and in production as well. You can run it on Linux, on Windows natively. You can run it on containers. And since September of this year, it runs not just on Intel chips, but also on ARM chips. So we cover pretty much the full gamut. Now, you can have access to it through containers. There is the free version of the Autonomous Database, and there's a free version of Autonomous for the Oracle Free. It's just that these official images take a bit longer to download. The official image for free takes about 8 to 9 gigabytes and 3 minutes to start. So we have put up other images that start much quickly, like this one, Oracle OCI Oracle Free. This one takes about 900 megabytes to download and starts up in about 10 seconds. Pretty quick. This is starting for version 23. If you need older versions, then you can use Oracle XE from version 11 to 21. Now, coming back to test containers, it's easy to get started. You just set up your test containers dependency in Maven or Gradle or what have you, and then off you go. But if you want to keep using, let's say, Kafka or RabbitMQ, or in this case, Postgres or MySQL or Oracle, you have to write a series of, well, a few lines of code to start a generic container, configure the properties, yada, yada, yada. It will be much, much better if you will say, I just want to use this particular product on my container. So Oracle Free can be used here, as you can see over there. Or you can use MySQL, such that once you configure an additional dependency, you only have to say 1 or 2 lines of code, and this will start exactly the container the way that you need it with all the defaults. I'm here using the latest, this is not the latest version of the Oracle Free provided by Gerald Wenzel, which happens to be my manager. So even though we're putting out these things on GitHub, it's still people from Oracle that know how to make these images work perfectly well. So you also have access to the, you need the drivers to talk to the database. If you didn't know, in the past, if you used to work with Oracle databases, you had to download the drivers from a specific OTN library, accept the license, yada, yada, yada. Nowadays, in September of 2019, you can download the drivers from Maven Central, just like any other driver. You just configure the dependency, and you don't have to worry about that. As a matter of fact, Spring Boot, Quarkus, and Macronaut do have a managed version of not just Oracle, but Postgres, MySQL, and the other databases. So you can only need to change one property in your POM file, for example, and that brings up the latest versions of the database. But if you need to know more about how to talk to an Oracle database and configure Maven, we have put up a link like this here, a page where it explains all the different use cases, all the different jar files, because it's more than one in case that you need other capabilities. Anyway, so I think that I've talked too much about the theory. Let's show some demos. So I'm going to go here. Oh, I went too fast to the theory. That's pretty good. So we have more time for the demo. I have a very basic Spring Boot application, which I happened to update to the latest release just like 2 days ago. I think this is the latest version of Spring 3.3. And what is interesting about this project is that I was telling you about those managed versions of the software. So Spring Boot defines this key that I can reuse and redefine the value on my own project. I think that the latest version of a Spring Boot and a Spring Data use an older version of the Oracle driver. So I chose to use the latest version of the Oracle driver right here. I'm also updating to the latest version of Hibernate 6 for my project. I believe that in the past it used to be like version 6.5, and that here's for a reason. Because when we released the version 23 of Database 23 AI Free, my team was responsible for sending a couple of pull requests for Hibernate to ensure that it worked properly. And there's one thing that we missed, which means when we deleting sequences, we miss the clause for if exists or it doesn't exist. So if you were to run with previous versions, you will see a stack trace somewhere in your build, and you might think, oh, something is broken. Kinda, just test will still work. With the latest versions of both the database driver and the Hibernate, then there is no longer any problem. We have fixed the issue, and things are working properly. So I just have to define a few dependencies here, like a Spring Boot starter and the Spring Boot starter test, so that I can test my, my database and the application. I'm also saying that I want to use this particular version of the Oracle driver. Where is the version number? Again, it's coming up from that property because it's defined by the Spring Boot dependencies. I also want to use DbUnit. The latest version is 2.8.0 in this test scope. I want to use Database Rider as well, latest version. And I want to use JUnit, obviously, JUnit 5 for testing these things. And I have Oracle-free dependency for test containers. And I think I had previously Postgres here to do some comparison, but actually this application will test only against the Oracle database. And this version that you see here, again, is coming from the default properties that a Spring Boot will give me. So if you're using Quarkus, Macron, or the others, you might need to configure the dependency in a different way. It might be perhaps a different property, but the idea is basically the same. It will allow you to override those managed properties coming from the framework definitions. What I have here is, I now understand that it's a quite trivial application. It's just one entity called customer. And you use different annotations to set this thing up. It has a DO, a repository that gives me access to the CRUD operations that you will expect, and a few other finders. Anyone here remembers, well, probably knows what Rails is from Ruby, right? Anyone knows what Grails is? What used to be known as Groovy on Rails, but now it's a different thing. So you can thank a dynamic language known Ruby and Groovy for these kind of features that you can now leverage on just plain Java. This is coming from there. So you can just define methods by naming conventions, and you can grab data, you can query data, you can store data very easily. The last thing is, this application is empty. I'm not interested in the application itself. I'm interested in setting up how we can test the entities and access. Because one thing is true here, we're expecting and we're hoping that a Spring Boot, whichever version that we chose, works as it expects, as it should, which means I issue a query and it'll give me the results. Now, if I want to verify the results properly, once I have something in memory, I'll need to talk to the database again. I could use one more time a Spring Boot to give me that information, but if I made a mistake in these queries, or if there happens to be a bug on the Spring framework, then maybe what I'm asserting, my test case might not be testing the proper thing. The reason to choose DbUnit and test containers and database Rider is that we go one level down, closer to the database, away from the framework, so that we can have better assertions. Because we're closer to the data, then in theory, we will be able to have these test cases that don't rely on any problems that might exist on the framework. But yes, of course, if there were to be a bug in DbUnit or database Rider, then we'll have to figure out how to solve it. Luckily, all these things are open source. Now, what is missing here yet is showcasing how the database looks like. It's just one table with 3 columns and some constraints over there. Nothing really groundbreaker, nothing fancy. And some properties for connecting to the database. So I'm going to connect to an Oracle database, some username and password. And one thing that I said here is that I'm going to show the SQL. So whatever the ORM is going to, or in this case, Hibernate, is going to issue to the database. All right. Okay, so enough of that. Let's show the test code, which let's start with the first one, database, DbUnit. Okay. So here, let's make it a little bigger. Just like in a standard JUnit 5 test case, we no longer stand for a base test class by default. And I don't like it, but it's the default now provided by JUnit that all our methods will be packaged private. I don't like not seeing a public, private, or protected access here. It's just me. I know it's weird. Anyway, so this is your regular Spring Boot test, which means it's going to start the dependency injection container. We'll be able to have access to all the beans that we have configured in the application. That's good. Then we start to see the first class coming from test containers. This is a specific container that knows how to talk to an Oracle database. And here I'm using the latest version of that image. This is the one that stops in about 10 seconds. And because I'm doing the management here, I will have 2 additional methods, before all and after all. This is just to ensure that I can start the container before all the test methods. This will invoke once per the whole class. And then I'm going to stop the container once all the test methods have been executed. Because this container starts up with all the defaults, I don't know which username or which password is used for the admin, and I also have no clue what URL I need to use to connect to. So I show the properties, that is when I'm running in production, but not when I'm running on tests like this, because this container will be created every single time I run my test case. Then the connection URL will be different every single time. It might be completely different port, so I need to have access to those properties. Luckily, the Oracle container has some specific methods. So if it was a generic container, I would have to use a generic way to say grab property X from my container. But the Oracle container class already has methods that give me what is the URL to connect to, the username, and the password. And I override using something which is a standard from Spring Boot, so that once the container is live, I can grab those properties, put it back inside the container, the dependency injection container, so a Spring framework, so that any other beans will need this. I also auto-wiring the repository over there and the data source. And finally, this thing here, the database tester, this is coming from DbUnit. This is the one that allows me to talk to the database. I'm doing this additional dance here because I believe this version of DbUnit has no clue about the Oracle data types. So this is some extra stuff that I need to do, but I mean, it's just plumbing. You could hide this behind a base abstract testing class if you want to. The last bit is to ensure that before each test method and after each test method, we can connect that database tester to the database. So again, everything that I have shown so far is plumbing code that can be factored away into common code. And then, here's how we're going to load the data set. I'm going to explain about what is the data set. Finally, we have some test cases. Our test methods come here. The first test method is using just regular Spring Boot and Spring data technology. So I'm just finding the last customer, but I find that customer by a given last name, and then just use regular assertions to find out if it's actually true. Once we have loaded data from the database into POJOs, then we just use regular Java code to deal with that data. That's exactly what we want an ORM, okay? So by this time, we expect the database to have some base data. Otherwise, this finder will fail. We're also expecting to have at least 2 rows in the customer table. We'll see from where this information is coming from. Then the other test method says, I'm going to insert a new object. So create a new instance of that entity, then use the repository to save it. Now, what's happening in this code is then we're using DbUnit to grab a definition of the expected data set. This definition is coming from some XML files. There are 2 formats supported. And we're also going to grab what is the current state of our database when we say this, get table customer. So we have now a live version of our data here in the way that DbUnit understands, and an expected version of the data that is fed off from XML. And then we do a diff at the data level. And if this is okay, DbUnit will say, good, your test case is green. If something is different, obviously, I will have a breaking test case here. This assert equals, I believe, is coming from DbUnit. So it looks like an assert equals from regular Hamcrest, but it's not. This is coming from DbUnit. So that's why we can do this diff for 2 different data sets. So what about that data set? Here is the initial data set. It's just a regular XML. This is the name of the table and the columns that we want to match. So you might recall, this looks quite similar to the schema that we have here, where we have the table customers and the 3 columns. So that's what we have here. And the expected data set looks like this. It's just 3 elements. Now, when I run this, I will expect everything to be fine. I will run it twice, 1 successfully and 1 failure. And this is kind of cool if you're working with a small data set, but if you have more than 1 table or a lot of rows, then creating this files by hand may be a little bit cumbersome. The good thing about DbUnit is that there is a mode where you can configure the tester to grab a data set from the real database and store that data set into whichever XML format that DbUnit understands. So you can grab information and then send it into XML files and then manually update the files in any way that you deem necessary so that you can run your test cases. If you want, you can have one data set per table. And then once you want to load all the data, you can load different data sets and compose them as if they were one fraction of your database. So this is something that DbUnit allows you to do. Now, as great as this thing looks like, there's a lot of plumbing code that you have to add here. Can we get rid of these things? Yes, we can. And this is where I will introduce Database Rider, which is this one here. Database Rider, and now in this test case, we have two additional annotations here. One is called DbRider. We will see what it does in a moment. And we're also using Testcontainers here. The advantage of using this annotation is that I can continue to define containers with the same types as we had before. I also using this annotation called container. And gone is the management that we had before for starting and stopping the container. This annotation plus this annotation will take care of that. Gone also is that plumbing that we have to do to set up the iDatabase tester and making sure that the database tester has a connection with the right properties, with the right types to Oracle. Everything is taken care of by Database Rider. So the only thing that I need to do is tell again my dependency injection container, so Spring Data and Spring Framework, to be aware of the properties that are coming from the database container. And now, notice that the code that I have to write here is way, way simpler. Because for setting up the database, I tell through an annotation on Database Rider, this is your input data set, which I'm going to use every time before you run this test method. And this is the expected data set, which I'm going to verify for you every time you finish invoking this test method, whether it's successful or failure. So the code to retrieve information is exactly the same as we had before. But in this case, we're also doing the validation that nothing changed where we're doing these verifications. And then the other one becomes much, much simpler. Notice that I have the same data set that is incoming, but a different data set that is outgoing. And the only code that I have to write here is the actual test code. I create a domain entity and then store it. And then the Database Rider will ensure that the database has been modified as I'm expecting. Now, these data sets in Database Rider, I can define it using YAML if you want to. So just start the block with the name of the table, and each one of the elements, this will be a row. It's a list of values, and each of these map key value pairs is a column name and a column value. And for the expected data set, then we get this, just one more row. Okay, so let's run this. I believe I already have a previous run just in case that things went wrong. So let's do Maven verify. Which command do you use to run test cases? Is it Maven test? Maven package? Anyone doing Maven clean install for testing? Please don't. Please use Maven verify. Maven verify is the last lifecycle session of Maven before install. This is the one that makes sure that you can run test cases, compile code, and also run integration test cases. Install, the other thing that it does is copy the jar files that you just generated into Maven local. If you don't need that for your test cases because you are working within the same project, don't use install for testing, just use verify. This is my personal rant. Okay, so here we go. And let's see. There is start creating the container for Ryuk, and now is Gerald Benzel. This is the Oracle free. It's starting 1537.01. Is that true? And let's see how long it takes. Network should be working. I have this working here on Docker. It's definitely taking a bit longer than I expected. It should have been around 10 seconds. Let me check if I had the right network. Yes, here we go. So how long did it take to start? For 3728 to 3701 to 3728. So it was around 27 seconds. And here we have the first test case. And here's the SQL used to create a DDL. Perfect. And here's the SQL to insert a new customer. The two methods were working correctly. So far, so good. And here is the second test case. Let's see if I write correctly. No, this was the first one. Here's the second test case running. There's some information coming out by Database Rider, so it inspects the database metadata. In case that something was not looking properly, then you can figure it out here. And the test run was successful. It might take a little while for this to finish. So while this is working, there's one thing that I should mention when you're running test cases. Oh, successful, perfect. Now, I run this, and apparently it's working, but there's one thing that I should say when running test cases. Never trust a test case you have not seen fail once, which means I'm going to make this test case fail by saying, I know that I'm expecting 2 rows from the database if just querying one value. So what if I say 3 here? I magically expect some mutation of my data and 1 row to be added here. That should not be the case. So once again, let's run the test case and see what happens. Hopefully this time the container will start a bit faster. But the good thing about this is that every time I run these test cases, I have a new container with a new version of the database, completely pristine and empty and clean, so that I can run my test cases as much as I want to. This time it took, let's see, starting from 3922 and it's finishing 3934, so it was about 12 seconds to start. Runs the test case and we got a first failure. Good. And then it will run the database Rider test case. It will take some time, like about a minute, and I will get a summary saying that I ran 4 test cases, 4 test methods, and one of them was a failure, which is what we were expecting. So correcting that typo of a 3 instead of a 2 will be easy. We run the test cases again, and you'll see that the test cases will continue to be green. So what we're seeing here is that effectively we're able to use real software, and by real software I mean the real database, which is this one here, instead of using an in-memory database to test out whatever features we have coming from our application. So if we happen to use PL SQL or any extension, any feature that is specific to that database vendor, then now we're able to do this thanks to Testcontainers. Okay. We go back here. So the demo didn't crash, so it was quite good. In case of the future, so one of the things that my team specifically is looking at is ensure that we as developers have a much better experience when dealing with these kind of projects and technologies. So we'll be looking at other places where we can extend the usage of databases and the driver. So we talk to the Spring Boot, we talk to Hibernate, we talk to other ISVs to ensure that they have access to the documentation, to test cases, to test benchmarks, and many other things to make sure that when they release the next versions of their software, then they can also take into account Oracle. By the way, all these technologies that I mentioned, they are able to test out their integrations with Oracle for free, thanks to the free database, to the free drivers. So just like they do it, you can also do it. If you happen to test and run on GitHub, whether it's free GitHub for open source or GitHub Enterprise, and if for whatever reason you cannot use Testcontainers, you can still run a database on GitHub. So again, you can use MySQL, Postgres, or Oracle for free. We have a GitHub action that allows you to bootstrap a database and wait until the database is ready. And once it's done, you can read the properties again, like the URL or the username and the password, and then connect that to your test case. If you need a command line tool to talk to the Oracle database, there's another free product called SQL CL, CL for command line, which happens to be there another GitHub action called Setup Oracle SQL CL, and you can use this to talk to an Oracle database. Now, I have some resources for you. Testcontainers.com is where you find most of the information about test containers, and they have a Slack community where you can ask all sorts of questions in case that you get stuck or you have any other doubts on how the technology works. DbUnit is hosted at SourceForge still, and that's where you find it. And the Database Rider is hosted on GitHub. And this is where, again, you can raise issues in case that you find something that is missing or you get in trouble with using these technologies. In the case of Oracle, the first link is for a website that gives you a list of free resources for developers. So it's not just the Oracle free database, whether it's in cloud or on-premise, but also, well, obviously Java, Linux, and a few other things. If you want to use the Oracle Cloud for free, there's the Oracle Cloud free right there. Or you want to use the one on premises, which is the one that I showcased today, running on containers, you can get on the third link. And if you want to run this kind of projects or test cases or other demos, we have an online platform called Live Labs, again, available for free, where you can run these kind of things. There's things about Micronaut and a Spring framework and just plain Java, or if you want to try out something in Node or something else, you can find many things for here. There's videos, there's online support, there are many things that you can have access to here. Again, all these resources are available to us developers. So I believe this is everything that I have for you now. I hope that you find this useful. Two things to remember from this session. One, use test containers. And two, you can really use the Oracle database for free for these kind of things: development, testing, and production. So thank you very much, Thessaloniki. If you happen to have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. I'll also be here the rest of the day and tomorrow, so just roaming around and listening to other great speakers that we have in this conference.
Thank you, Andre.